The sun cast long shadows through the ancient pines as evening settled over the village of Pinecrest. Nestled at the edge of the vast Northwood forest, the wooden cabins seemed to grow from the earth itself, their smoke trails rising like silent prayers into the darkening sky. For generations, the people of Pinecrest had lived by an unspoken rule: respect the forest and the creatures within it, but never trust them completely. Maria Chen stood on her porch, watching as the men returned from their day's hunt. Her eyes scanned the tree line instinctively, a habit formed from years of living where the wilderness pressed against human settlement like a curious beast. The villagers of Pinecrest were neither strangers to nature nor friends with it. They took what they needed and left the rest, understanding that beyond their fences lived forces both beautiful and dangerous. "Another bear sighting today," Thomas Miller announced as the hunters gathered in the village center. "Big female near the eastern creek." "She was watching us, I swear it." The other men nodded, their faces serious in the fading light. Bear encounters had increased this season, causing concern among the villagers who still remembered the tragedy 3 summers ago when young Peter Hayes had wandered too far and never returned. What the people of Pinecrest didn't understand was that the forest had its own memories. The animals, especially the bears, remembered too. The scent of humans, the sound of their weapons, the boundaries that had been drawn and redrawn over decades. Some of the older bears carried scars from encounters, lessons written in flesh and bone. Elder Sarah, the oldest resident of Pinecrest at 92, often told children stories of a time when humans and animals had spoken the same language, when understanding flowed between species like water between cupped hands. The children would listen wide-eyed while their parents smiled politely, attributing such tales to an old woman's fading mind. "The forest knows more than we think," she would say, her clouded eyes fixed on something distant. "And sometimes when the need is great enough, the old boundaries fall away." No one in Pinecrest could have imagined how prophetic those words would become, or that the boundary between human and beast would soon be crossed in a way that would leave them all speechless. A crossing begun not by human hands, but by the massive paws of a creature they had been taught to fear. The morning dawned gray and misty, rain clouds hovering like indecision above the Northwood forest. Lisa Mercer, a young woman with city clothes and haunted eyes, stumbled through the underbrush. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her arms cradling a small bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Tears streaked her face as she pushed deeper into the forest, far from the logging road where her car sat abandoned. She had driven all night from the city, over 300 miles away, with only the occasional whimper from the bundle to break the silence. Now, with morning coming, her resolve was failing. Lisa looked down at the sleeping face of her newborn son, his tiny features peaceful in sleep, unaware of the desperate choice his mother was about to make. "Someone will find you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Someone kind. Someone who can give you what I cannot." The words sounded hollow even to her own ears. Deep in the forest, who would find a baby before the elements or wild animals did? But Lisa's mind was fractured by postpartum depression, grief over the baby's father abandoning them, and the overwhelming fear of raising a child alone with no money and no support. She found a hollow beneath a large oak tree, its roots creating a natural cradle above the damp ground. With trembling hands, she placed the bundle in this makeshift shelter. From her pocket, she pulled a small stuffed rabbit, tucking it beside the infant. The baby stirred but did not wake. "I am sorry," Lisa said, touching his cheek one last time. Then she turned and ran, her footsteps crashing through the forest, her sobs carried away by the morning breeze. For almost an hour, the baby slept on, protected momentarily by the thick blanket in the shelter of the tree roots. But as the morning warmed slightly, he woke hungry and alone. His cries started softly, then grew in volume and desperation, piercing the forest quiet like a siren. The sound traveled across the forest floor, bouncing off trees and rocks, carried by the wind that had begun to pick up. It startled a group of deer drinking at a stream, sent chipmunks scurrying for cover, and caused birds to take flight in alarm. The cries were foreign to the forest, not the call of any known creature, but something vulnerable and distressed. The sound reached the sensitive ears of forest predators, too. A fox paused in its hunting, nose lifted to the air. A pair of wolves changed direction, curious about the strange noise, And in a den not far from where the baby lay crying, a large female bear raised her head, listening to the unfamiliar sound that somehow stirred something deep within her massive frame. The baby's cries grew weaker as the morning wore on. The blue blanket provided little protection as a light rain began to fall, and hunger gnawed at his tiny belly. His tiny hands reached out, seeking comfort that was not there, while above him, dark storm clouds gathered, indifferent to the small life struggling below. The female bear, known to the villagers as the Eastern Creek Bear, moved through the forest with surprising grace for her size. Her dark brown fur was thick and glossy, despite a thin scar that ran along her right flank, a reminder of an encounter with human hunters 3 seasons ago. She had been tracking the strange crying sound for nearly an hour, her curiosity overcoming her usual caution. The rain fell steadily now, pattering on leaves and washing away scents, but the bear pressed forward. Something about the sound pulled at her, awakening memories buried deep in her animal mind. 2 springs ago, she had lost her own cubs to a flash flood that swept through her den while she was hunting. Their cries as the waters rose had haunted her dreams during the long winter hibernation. When she finally found the source of the sound, the bear stopped, her massive head tilting in confusion. The tiny creature beneath the oak tree was unlike anything she had encountered. It was not a typical prey animal, nor was it a predator. Its scent was strange, carrying the unmistakable trace of humans, beings the bear had learned to avoid at all costs. Her instincts warred within her. Every lesson nature had taught her said to turn away from anything human. Her hunger suggested the small bundle might be food, yet something else, something deeper and more primal, kept her rooted to the spot, watching as the tiny being squirmed weakly in its wet blanket. The baby's cries had faded to whimpers now, its strength ebbing as cold and hunger took their toll. The bear moved closer, her hot breath visible in the cool air. She nudged the bundle gently with her nose, feeling the warmth of life still present within. The baby stirred at her touch, turning instinctively toward the heat of her body. In that moment, something changed in the bear. Perhaps it was the memory of her lost cubs, or some ancient connection between mothers of all species. Perhaps it was simply that the forest had chosen her for this strange task. Whatever the reason, the bear made a decision that defied everything in her nature. With extreme gentleness, she carefully took the edge of the blanket between her teeth. The fabric was soaked but held firm as she lifted the bundle from its hollow. The baby, feeling movement, opened its eyes briefly, looking directly at the bear without fear, too young to know that this massive creature was supposed to be its enemy. The bear stood there in the rain, the baby dangling gently from her mouth as thunder rumbled in the distance. She knew with certainty that this fragile being would not survive the coming storm, and she knew, with equal certainty, where she needed to take it. The bear stood motionless, rain streaming down her fur, the baby's weight light in her jaws. Her mind, though not capable of human reasoning, processed information with the acute intelligence that had kept her alive for 8 winters. The tiny human would not survive the night in the forest. This knowledge settled in her like a stone. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the woods in harsh white light. The storm was worsening. The bear's den was over 2 miles away, across a swollen creek and up a rocky hillside. Too far, too dangerous for this fragile bundle. The bear's nostrils flared as she caught another scent on the rain-soaked air. Humans. Their settlement lay to the east, perhaps an hour's journey through the forest. The same humans who had shot at her last season, who set traps that caught her paw once, leaving her limping for weeks. The humans who cut trees and scared away the salmon with their noise. The baby made a soft sound, more a sigh than a cry now. Its warmth was fading against the bear's sensitive mouth. Images moved through the bear's mind, not in words but in sensations and memories. The pain of her own loss, the empty den where cubs once tumbled and played, the primal understanding that all young ones deserve protection, and something else, a memory so old it seemed to come from before her own birth. A memory of a time when her kind and humans had not always been enemies, when a different understanding had existed between forest and village. This ancient memory passed through generations of bears in this forest, stirred within her. The bear turned toward the human settlement, her decision made. She would take this human cub to its own kind. They might kill her for approaching, but the infant would live. It was a trade the bear was willing to make, though she could not have explained why, even to herself. With a gentleness that belied her size, she adjusted her grip on the blanket, ensuring the baby was secure but not crushed. Then she began to move through the forest, no longer with the stealth of a predator, but with the determined pace of a creature on a mission. Her powerful legs carried her forward as rain lashed at her face and thunder boomed overhead. The bear was doing something no bear had done in living memory. She was deliberately moving toward human danger rather than away from it, carrying with her a treasure she had no reason to protect. The forest itself seemed to hold its breath as she passed. The storm unleashed its full fury as the bear navigated the dense forest. Rain came down in sheets, transforming gentle streams into raging torrents, and turning the forest floor into a treacherous maze of mud and fallen branches. The bear moved with determined purpose, her powerful muscles working to maintain balance on the slippery ground while keeping her precious cargo safe. The first major obstacle appeared less than a mile into her journey. The normally placid Turner Creek had swollen into a churning mass of brown water, carrying broken trees and debris in its angry current. The bear paused at the bank, the baby still dangling from her mouth, and assessed the danger. She could smell human settlement beyond the water, but crossing seemed impossible. For 20 minutes she paced the bank, searching for a safe passage. Finally, she spotted a fallen pine that stretched almost completely across the water. With careful deliberation, she placed each massive paw on the slick trunk, testing her weight before committing to each step. Halfway across, the log shifted slightly. The bear froze, her muscles tense, waiting for the wood to settle before continuing. One misstep would send both her and the baby into the deadly current below. Once safely across, she paused to adjust her grip on the blanket. The baby had gone quiet, lulled perhaps by the motion and the rhythmic sound of the rain. The bear sniffed at the bundle, detecting the faint but steady heartbeat within. Still alive. As she continued eastward, a new scent stopped her cold. Wolf. A pack had been hunting these woods, competitors for the same game. The bear had mostly avoided them, their territories rarely overlapping, but the storm had driven wildlife to seek shelter in unfamiliar places. The scent was fresh, made sharper by the rain. She changed course slightly, moving more cautiously now, but the wolves had caught her scent as well. Through the curtain of rain, she spotted them, 3 gray shadows moving parallel to her path. They were curious about what she carried, unusual behavior for a bear. In normal circumstances, the bear would have climbed a tree or stood her ground, her size and strength enough to deter the pack. But with the baby in her jaws, she could do neither. The alpha wolf, a scarred male, moved closer, testing her reaction. The bear made a warning sound deep in her throat, careful not to dislodge the blanket. The wolves circled, their hunger overriding their natural caution. The baby chose that moment to make a weak, mewling cry. The sound confused the wolves momentarily, giving the bear the chance she needed. She lunged forward suddenly, charging directly at the alpha with a speed that belied her bulk. Surprised, the wolf leapt back, and his pack scattered. The bear did not pursue them, but instead used the opportunity to crash through the underbrush away from the pack, moving faster now despite the dangerous footing. The next challenge came in the form of human hunters. 3 men with rifles sheltered under a rocky overhang, waiting out the storm. The bear smelled them before seeing them and froze behind a thicket of brambles. Her heart pounded, not from exertion, but from fear. These were the very humans who had wounded her before. She could sense their rifles, the metal and oil scent distinct even in the rain. The baby stirred in the blanket, making small movements that threatened to catch the hunter's attention. The bear remained perfectly still, her dark fur blending with the shadows of the forest. One of the men stood, stretching his legs, and peered out into the rain. For a terrifying moment, he seemed to look directly at where the bear hid. But then he turned away, saying something to his companions. The bear waited, patient as only a wild creature can be, until the men settled back under their shelter. Then, with painstaking slowness, she began to circle wide around them, taking a longer route that would avoid their detection. Each step was placed with deliberate care, to avoid snapping twigs or rustling leaves. The detour cost her precious time, but confrontation would have meant certain death. By the time she cleared the hunter's position, the storm had begun to ease slightly, though rain still fell steadily. The bear was tiring now, the strain of carrying the baby and navigating the treacherous conditions taking its toll. But the scent of the human settlement was stronger, driving her forward with renewed determination. The final obstacle before reaching the village edge was a steep ravine cut by years of water flow, now filled with a rushing torrent from the storm. No fallen trees bridged this gap, no shallow crossing presented itself. The bear paced along the edge, the village lights visible through the trees on the other side, so close yet unreachable. The baby began to stir more actively now, its cries growing stronger as if sensing they were near safety. The bear made her decision. With the blanket securely clenched in her jaws, she began descending the steep bank, her powerful claws digging into the mud for purchase. When she reached the water's edge, she paused only briefly before plunging into the current. The force of the water was immense, threatening to sweep her downstream. But the bear was strong, her powerful legs churning against the flow, her head held high to keep the baby above water. For a terrifying moment, the current pushed her backward. But with one mighty effort, she fought her way forward, inch by precious inch, until she felt the bottom slope upward on the far side. Dripping and exhausted, the bear pulled herself up the opposite bank. The baby was wet but still wrapped in the blanket, which had somehow stayed intact through the crossing. The bear took a moment to catch her breath, then continued toward the village, her pace more urgent now, sensing that her journey was almost complete. The forest thinned as she approached the village boundary. Through the trees she could see wooden cabins, smoke rising from chimneys, the scent of humans everywhere. Fear gripped her, an instinct almost too powerful to overcome. But the weight of the baby in her jaws reminded her of her purpose. With trembling legs but determined spirit, she moved forward, out of the shelter of the forest that had been her home, and toward the human world that had always been her enemy. The rain had finally stopped as dusk settled over Pinecrest. The storm clouds parted in places, allowing the last light of day to cast long shadows across the village. Most residents had retreated indoors, tending to fires and preparing evening meals. Only a few were outside, assessing damage from the storm or finishing chores before nightfall. Thomas Miller, the hunter who had reported the bear sighting that morning, was stacking firewood on his porch when movement at the forest edge caught his eye. He squinted, peering through the dim light. What he saw made him drop the log he was holding with a heavy thud. At the tree line, where forest met the cleared land surrounding the village, stood the massive form of a bear. Not just any bear, but the largest he had seen in these parts. Even from this distance, Thomas recognized the scar on her flank. It was the female from the eastern creek, the one they had been tracking all season. But it was what dangled from the bear's mouth that froze Thomas in place. A pale blue bundle, swinging gently with each breath the animal took. The hunter's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Was it food? A kill the bear was bringing back? Number. The way she held it was too careful, too deliberate. "Daniel," Thomas called to his hunting partner across the way. "Get your rifle. The bear is here." His shout broke the evening quiet, sending several villagers to their windows and doors. The bear, hearing the commotion, stopped her advance but did not retreat. Instead, she stood perfectly still, the bundle held firmly in her jaws. Daniel emerged from his cabin with his rifle, and several other men appeared with weapons. Maria Chen stepped onto her porch, her hand covering her mouth in shock as she realized what was happening. Elder Sarah hobbled out from her small home, her clouded eyes somehow finding the bear in the dim light. "Wait," the old woman called out, her voice surprisingly strong. "Look at what she carries." The bear took another step forward, then another, entering the clearing that surrounded the village. She was now fully exposed, without the protection of the forest. Every instinct in her body screamed to run, to protect herself, but the bundle in her mouth kept her moving forward. Her eyes darted from human to human, noting the weapons, remembering the pain they could inflict. Thomas raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel at the massive predator. "She's got something," he called out. "Some kind of kill." "Not a kill," Elder Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension. Look closer. Maria, braver than most, took a hesitant step off her porch. The bear's eyes locked with hers, and something passed between them, a communication beyond words. As Maria moved cautiously closer, the bear lowered her head slightly, the bundle now more visible in the fading light. A sound emerged from the bundle, faint but unmistakable, a baby's cry. "My God," Maria gasped, "it's a child!" The villagers froze in disbelief. Thomas lowered his rifle slightly, confusion replacing his resolve. The bear remained still, her eyes never leaving Maria, who had now stopped a cautious distance away. The bear's intention was clear to anyone watching. She had brought the human child to them, deliberately, purposefully, at enormous risk to herself. For a long, tense moment, no one moved. The bear stood at the edge of the village, the most dangerous place she could possibly be, surrounded by humans with weapons, completely exposed and vulnerable. Yet she did not run. She waited, the baby still held carefully in her jaws, as if somehow knowing that this moment would determine whether her extraordinary journey had been in vain. "Nobody move," Elder Sarah commanded, her voice carrying a strength that belied her frail frame. She walked forward slowly, her gnarled walking stick tapping the ground before her. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the 92-year-old woman approached the massive predator without a trace of fear. Thomas kept his rifle trained on the bear, finger hovering near the trigger. "Sarah, get back!" he hissed. But the old woman ignored him. She stopped a few feet from the bear and looked directly into its eyes. The bear returned her gaze, something like recognition flickering in its dark eyes. "You brought the child to us," Sarah said softly, addressing the bear as if it could understand her words. "Why?" As if in response, the bear gently lowered the bundle to the ground. With extreme care, she used her nose to nudge the blanket toward Sarah's feet, then took 3 steps backward. The baby's cries grew stronger now, as if sensing safety was near. Maria rushed forward and scooped up the bundle, quickly unwrapping the wet blanket to reveal a newborn baby boy, cold but alive, his tiny fists waving in the air. A small stuffed rabbit fell from the blanket onto the ground. "He needs warmth and milk quickly," Maria said, cradling the infant against her chest. Several women hurried forward to help, taking the baby toward the nearest cabin. But Elder Sarah remained, her eyes still fixed on the bear, who had not fled despite the opportunity. "I know you," she whispered. "I remember now." The villagers fell silent, watching the strange tableau of elderly woman and wild predator seemingly communicating across some ancient divide. "What is happening?" Thomas asked, his rifle still raised but his confusion evident. Sarah turned to address the gathered villagers, her voice carrying across the clearing. 8 years ago, my son James and I found a bear cub trapped in one of our old hunting snares. Its mother had been killed by hunters from the neighboring settlement. The cub was starving, badly injured by the wire. Murmurs spread through the crowd as some of the older residents remembered the incident. James wanted to put it out of its misery, but I insisted we save it. We treated its wounds, fed it with milk from our goats, and kept it alive until it was strong enough to return to the forest. She pointed at the bear, her finger trembling slightly. "Look at the scar on her right front paw. That's from the snare. This is the same bear." The villagers stared in disbelief. The bear shifted her weight, the distinctive scar clearly visible on her front paw. "She remembers," Sarah continued, her voice breaking with emotion. "She was dying, and humans saved her. Now she found a human baby dying, and she brought it to us, knowing we could save it when she could not." Daniel lowered his rifle first. Then slowly the other men followed suit. The bear watched them, her posture relaxing slightly as the threat diminished. "But how did she know to bring it to us specifically?" someone asked. Sarah smiled, tears in her clouded eyes. "She didn't bring it to us specifically. She brought it to humans. But perhaps it's no coincidence she came to the edge of our village rather than any other." Maria returned to the clearing, having left the baby in the care of the village midwife. She picked up the small stuffed rabbit from the ground, turning it over in her hands. "There's something else," she said, her voice hushed with realization. "This rabbit, it's handmade with a distinctive pattern I've seen before." She looked up at the gathered villagers. "My sister Lisa makes these. She lives in the city, but she's always sent me these little rabbits she sews. This baby, I think it might be my nephew." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The bear, seemingly sensing her mission was complete, began to back away toward the forest. "Let her go," Sarah said firmly when Thomas instinctively raised his rifle again. "She has done something beyond our understanding, something that defies everything we thought we knew about the divide between human and animal." The bear paused at the forest edge, looking back one last time at the humans. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between species, an acknowledgement of a debt repaid and a circle completed. Then she turned and disappeared into the shadows of the trees, leaving the humans to contemplate the extraordinary gift she had delivered and the shocking truth behind her actions. Spring came to Pinecrest, bringing with it new life and renewed purpose. The village had changed in ways both subtle and profound since that stormy winter evening when a bear had delivered a baby to their doorstep. The child, now named Noah, thrived under the care of his Aunt Maria. Lisa had been found the day after the storm, her car still parked on the logging road. Suffering from severe postpartum depression, she was receiving treatment in the city hospital. Maria had promised to care for Noah until Lisa was well enough to make decisions about their future, whatever those might be. The story of the bear who saved a human baby spread far beyond Pinecrest. News reporters came from the city, wildlife experts offered theories and explanations, but none were as compelling as the simple truth. An animal had remembered kindness and returned it in kind. Thomas Miller, who had once been the first to raise his rifle at any bear sighting, now led efforts to create protected corridors through the forest where wildlife could travel safely. Hunting still occurred, but with new regulations and a different spirit behind it. The villagers took only what they needed, with gratitude rather than entitlement. Elder Sarah, whose wisdom had once been dismissed as the ramblings of an old woman, now found her stories of human-animal connection sought after by young and old alike. The ancient tales she shared of a time when the boundary between species was more permeable no longer seemed like mere fantasy. On the edge of the village, in a small clearing visible from Maria's porch, the villagers placed a carved stone marker. It bore no words, only the simple outline of a bear and a human child. It stood as a reminder of what they had witnessed and what they had learned. Sometimes in the early dawn or late evening hours, villagers would spot a large female bear at the forest edge, watching the village from a distance. No one raised a weapon or sounded an alarm. Instead, they would nod in acknowledgement, a gesture of respect to a creature they now understood was not so different from themselves. And little Noah, too young to remember any of what had happened, nevertheless seemed drawn to the forest in a way the other children were not. He would sit for hours watching the tree line, as if waiting for something or someone to emerge. The stuffed rabbit, now cleaned and repaired, remained his constant companion, a link to both his mother and the unlikely savior who had carried him to safety. In Pinecrest, the boundary between human and wild had been forever redrawn, not by fear or dominance, but by an act of compassion that reminded all who witnessed it that the capacity for sacrifice and love extended far beyond the human heart. If this remarkable tale of courage and connection across species touched your heart, there are many more extraordinary stories waiting for you. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for everyday narratives that will amaze, inspire, and remind you of the wonders that surround us every day. Join our community of storytellers and listeners who believe that the most powerful stories are those that reveal the unexpected connections in our world.